Hey, everybody. Welcome to Energy Impacts with David Blackman. I'm your host, David Blackman. Obviously, I'm the old guy here. With me today is a fantastic guest who I follow on X and YouTube, Matt Whitlock, who is the creator of the 10-Minute Drill. He's a longtime Republican communications pro who has a lot of experience in government and campaigns, and really appreciate you for taking the time to join us today, Matt.
I'm excited. I've been a long-time fan of your work in the energy space and across the board and what you do. So it's an honor to join you today. Thanks so much for having
Thank
me.
you. I'm honored. I'm honored for you to say that. I look at what you do, and it's just so fantastic. Folks, if you're not following the 10-Minute Drill and subscribing to it on YouTube, following it on X, you're really missing out on fantastic, very quick hit information in the mornings that just kind of sets your day. And Matt just gives you what, 5 or 6 topics and lets you know what's actually happening during the day, things to pay attention to. And he has a point of view on everything that, of course, fits right in with me because we're both kind of on the conservative side of things. And Matt, before we get into the topics we want to cover today, I want to just give you a few minutes, talk about your background and how you came to create this this terrific podcast.
Well, that's so very kind of you to say. Thank you so much for those kind words. Our goal really is to just be a sort of political news spark notes for the day. I think there's a lot of great podcasts out there. There's a lot of great media sources, but sometimes culling through all of it is really difficult. Part of the reason that I had the idea to start this in the first place was having, in the election in particular, so many family members, friends who would reach out and say, is this true? Is this not true? What does this mean? What's the context of this? There's so much news at any given time, and knowing what's worth following, what is real, what is just totally made up internet garbage is a challenge everybody faces. I have been in Washington now for about 13 years. My first job was as Utah Senator Mike Lee's driver. And then I spent...
Senator.
Yeah, he's a great senator, great man, good friend. And I got to be his driver and then a speechwriter. And then I went into sort of a corporate communications vertical for a while where I learned a lot, and then went back to the Senate, worked for Utah's other senator at the time, Orrin Hatch, for a long time, his press secretary, communications director, and then deputy chief of staff, which was fantastic. Another person who loves free markets, loves good American energy, and represents the great state of Utah, which I also love very much. And then after that, went to the NRC, worked on Senate campaigns, and now I'm at a firm called CRC Advisors, advising a wide range of different groups, but I also get to do things like 10-Minute Drill. A big part of my efforts are simply to distill down the news of the day, the most important topics, and help people understand kind of from a conservative perspective, how to interpret what's going on in the media, what's worth tracking, following, paying attention to, what's not. Because again, it is just such a fire hose of information all the time, especially I think we all can agree in the Trump years. You know, when President Trump is in office, there is news happening all the time.
Oh my God.
And media and how they sort of approach covering President Trump is a unique beast in all its own. You'll remember I was a Senate, staffer during the first Trump term, and media would just, it's like watching a ping pong match where they jump back and forth with, trying to keep up with what he was doing and trying to figure out whether, every Trump tweet was a 5-alarm fire, things like that. They've gotten a little bit more calibrated, but still at any given time, you've got major media outlets getting things that he's doing wrong or, not totally contextualized for people to understand them, things like that. And so people like me, come in and try and understand from a policy perspective, having worked in Capitol Hill, having worked close with the administration and being able to sort of understand the nuts and bolts behind it all, I think hopefully can be helpful to people.
Yeah, talking about Trump and the media trying to cover him, I remember in 2015 when he first began that campaign, and I fairly early on realized he's probably going to be the Republican nominee. And so I read his books. I had read The Art of the Deal before, but I picked it up, read it again, and just, try to really get an understanding of how he thinks, how he communicates. And I feel like no one, literally no one, other than maybe Peter Doocy and the mainstream media and the White House press corps, has ever taken a minute to actually try to understand how he thinks. And I think that really helps drive the horrible, stupid, often really stupid and amateurish coverage of what he's doing in the office. And I just wonder if you have a similar view, or if you know some reporters who have actually tried to do that.
I think there are a few. I think Peter Doocy is a good one. Peter Doocy is so effective working as a White House correspondent. And for one, because President Trump will answer his questions. And for two, Peter sometimes will sort of lead the president down a path in a series of questions that get from the topic of the day to more and more downstream. Just this week, there was the incident in the White House where Peter showed the president his phone in a video of someone throwing something out a White House window, and it made memes and incredible content. Was hilarious to follow. But outside of that, one person that I think does actually do a very good job of interpreting President Trump would be Selena Zito. She's a columnist, normally writes with The Examiner. She's somebody who spent a ton of time both understanding middle America, understanding, what they care about, and also understanding President Trump and his value set. And perhaps most importantly of all, how they meet in the middle. What is it about this brash billionaire with gold-plated toilets that people in middle America have come to adore so much, even if it doesn't feel like on paper they don't have anything in common? I think one of the biggest disconnects for so much of the media is they can't understand that there would be any connective tissue there because they haven't really spent the time trying to understand middle American values. You'll remember after 2016, there was an entire genre of media of reporters saying, I went and stood at a gas station or went to a diner in the middle of Ohio trying to understand how this Trump phenomenon happened. The fact that they needed to do that sort of tells you everything you need to know. And I think people like Selena who have done that their entire lives already had such a good head start in being able to sit down and say, here's what they think, here's what he's doing, and here's why it all marries together. So she's kind of the template, I would say, of people who've done well with that.
Another one I would throw out there too is Molly Hemingway at the Federal.
Yes, Molly, definitely.
She has definitely taken the time. She fully understands how he communicates, what he's thinking, and why he's doing the thing he does. But when you look at CBS, ABC, NBC, New York Times, CNN, there's nobody in any of those platforms that, at least as far as I can tell, has ever bothered to spend a moment of time trying to really understand the president of the United States even in his second term, which is
You're
bizarre.
exactly right. That last point that you said, I think, is the most important. They haven't spent the time investing in trying to understand. I will say occasionally you get a commentator who comes in. For example, when you say CNN, someone like a Scott Jennings, who actually can sort of do the break down the fourth wall, look into the camera and say, these people just don't get it, and they haven't tried to get it. But everyone who's actually a media journalist type is more sort of, trying to speak to the audiences they have in the language they understand without trying to bridge what they're seeing as if it's, standing outside of a display at a zoo and saying, look at these weird animals. All right, let's go on to the next thing, instead of trying to actually understand these are our neighbors. These are people around us who are voting a certain way. Instead of trying to understand why, we're just going to say they're crazy, radical, whatever dismissive terms they might have.
Well, so I could talk about this kind of stuff all day long. We got 30 minutes here. We're 8 minutes in. Let's talk about energy. This is supposed to be an energy podcast. And what really gave me the idea to reach out to you was the segment you did last week on this web of dark money groups, 501c3s and NGOs that are really pouring billions of dollars into fighting the Trump agenda, fighting against nuclear, fighting against fossil fuels. They're all tied in with the wind and solar businesses. And I just, you did such a great segment on that and so concise. This is something I've been interested in for 10, 12 years now and have done some research into, but just talk about that and how you got connected with that issue. What brought that up to you?
Absolutely. Well, and you're very kind to say that. I have also been fascinated by the left-wing web of dark money for a long time. And part of what really made this first percolate for me is in 2020, I was at the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and I was working on, across the board, 23 different Republican Senate races. And one that was the most expensive, the most toxic, the most contested was the Maine Senate race for Susan Collins, the incumbent. Democrats spent hundreds of millions of dollars in that race. And one of the faces of that, In Maine, and spending that much money in Maine goes a long way because it's smaller media markets and a population that is, not as difficult to reach. But the dark money component of that, this is where I really first learned about dark money, which is where a group of, billionaires funnel their own money through these C3, C4s, nonprofit groups that have innocuous names like the Committee for Rainbows and Unicorns, where someone like a Bill Gates can give $10 million, and then that committee can take that. And again, they don't have to disclose that giving. This is how Bill Gates can shape politics without having his fingerprints on things. That Committee for Rainbows and Unicorns can run attack ads, can set up a news blog where they run attack pieces about Susan Collins, pretending that it is traditional media that outlets like the New York Times, Washington Post will see and then amplify as if it was normal news. That's something we saw quite a bit. Susan Collins, in the time that I was working on that race, had 2 or 3 different fake news websites pop up against her that we later found out were all funded and orchestrated by the Arabella Advisors Network. That is a phrase that I want everyone to get to understand, is the Arabella Advisors Network. They are the mothership of left-wing dark money. And so that's how I first started to recognize the fact that the left had a behemoth Death Star behind the scenes that couldn't be tracked, that was causing havoc everywhere. And in every political fight since then, I've been able to look in and see, okay, for example, the fight over voter ID. You see a bunch of left-wing groups come out and say, this is voter suppression. This is going to take away people's right to vote. You look at the people owning those campaigns and you can find, oh, this is an Arabella Advisors connected group. You see, the campaign against Brett Kavanaugh. One of the primary groups leading that was a group called Demand Justice, which was run by people who were in and out of the Biden administration, the Obama administration before that, but was funded by this dark money, involved with groups like the Arabella Advisors larger network, and then there's subgroups like the 1630 Fund, the Windward Fund, that all are sort of a part of this Death Star network to take billionaire dark money and filter it through to carry out their political will. And so climate is one of the biggest sort of outputs of this left-wing dark money universe. And so one thing that I talked about last week that also has new news this week is the issue of a group called the Environmental Law Institute. Now, the Environmental Law Institute, when you look it up, they look like a polished judicial education group, a group that exists to train judges and lawyers on all sorts of different things. Lawyers have so many different education requirements for, maintaining their bar licenses, things like that. This is one that the federal government has largely blessed as a verified entity to educate judges, lawyers, things like that. That's the Environmental Law Institute. They have a project that's called the Climate Judiciary Project, and that exists to indoctrinate judges about climate change. And we've been able to find their curriculums. We've been able to find the presentations where they basically talk about how can we make oil and gas companies pay for weather disasters. And one thing that I always talk about is they don't really worry about that connective tissue there, because normally you would need a scientific explanation for how me filling my car up with gas is causing a flood that's driving up sea levels. They don't even worry about that because they've gotten media to basically take it and run with it, whether there's a scientific explanation or not. So the Environmental Law Institute's Climate Judiciary Project is holding these forums with judges like the Hawaii Supreme Court Justice Rechtenwald. He's the Chief Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court, who's refused to recuse himself from the Honolulu case, where Honolulu is suing Sunoco and a number of different oil and gas companies, saying they caused sea rise. They caused flooding in Honolulu. We need them to pay us billions of dollars so we can improve our infrastructure. If that doesn't sound like the craziest thing in the world to you, it sure does to me. And so now that President Trump and Elon have basically started this culture of follow the money, it has become a sort of fun, exciting thing for everybody to jump in and say, what left-wing dark money group or what sort of taxpayer-funded NGO is also funding this effort to get rid of oil and gas, which will drive up our own utility costs, our own price at the pump. And there's this, dark money web behind it. And so we had the letter last week. A group of attorneys general wrote to the EPA and said, please cut off any taxpayer dollars going to this climate judiciary, clearly political effort to indoctrinate judges. Then just this week, there were new developments on that front with a House committee announcing that they also wanted to get more information from the Climate Judiciary Project about what they've been doing. A gentleman named Jason Isaac, who I think you and I both know from the American Energy Institute, compiled a massive report on this about 6-8 months ago that a number of different groups have cited as they've said, we need more information about this because this is a massive political enterprise that our tax dollars in different ways have gone to funding, which is going to make our lives worse. So I think it's been a fascinating topic. I think it's great to see the engagement of people saying, wait a sec, this runs directly in the face of what people voted for with President Trump's promised energy renaissance that will lower costs, lower inflation, and make everyone's lives better. Why is this dark money network doing everything they can to stop it?
Yeah, and Jason's my next interview on this podcast, Jason Isaac.
Awesome.
So I appreciate you bringing him up. I got to do a little ad for my next podcast there.
Yes, absolutely.
The Honolulu case is a part of, that's part of this lawfare effort led by
Yes,
Sher Edling out of the Sher Edling firm out of San Francisco. And I've written half a dozen stories about that. Fortunately, that Supreme Court justice seems to be the only judge they've managed to get to do this, quote, re-education effort on in his brain, because they've lost, I believe, 10 out of 11 decisions now, 10 out of 11 cases that have so far been decided, been tossed out of court. The Supreme Court of the United States, of course, is going to end up having to decide the Honolulu case because we know their Supreme Court's probably going to rule the wrong way. But
if you read any of their decisions in the Hawaii Supreme Court, they use those phrases like the spirit of aloha guides our lawmaking, and they sound like crackpots. And to me, when everyone was trying to sort of figure out if the Supreme Court was going to grant cert and hear the Honolulu case, it was like, are they going to like acknowledge the fact that like they're clearly on drugs in the Hawaii Supreme Court as they try and litigate this? But I think the other one to watch in the very near future is going to be a Boulder case that's very similar, that has been, granted cert that the Supreme Court is going to engage on. And I think that'll be another interesting one to see, because the Supreme Court will look at this through a very different lens than some of these hyper political state courts that, again, like, Hawaii, smoke some ganja and then say spirit of aloha, do whatever you need to do. So I think the entire lawfare campaign has been crazy to watch, because you look at all these different cities and states that have filed these suits and said, we need oil and gas companies to pay for our infrastructure, ignore the science, ignore the sort of, middle ground there of how we got to that point that like they clearly owe us this money for this. And as you said, they have been struck down in a number of places, but that hasn't stopped them, because they have essentially endless money from the Arabella Advisors Network, which, as we talked about, we covered this, I believe, in this morning's episode of 10-Minute Drill. Arabella Advisors is funding both Sher Edling to try and run these cases, and the Climate Judiciary Project boasts of all of their connections to Sher Edling. Then they're also funding the judicial education component of it. But the other part of this too that we haven't really talked about is the Chinese Communist Party also funding so much of this lawfare. Why would China, who is building a new coal plant every single day, want to fund an effort to kill oil, gas, coal, all reliable energy resources in America? I wonder why.
Wonder why.
We all know the answer to that.
Yeah, I've been following this. So since the advent of the shale revolution back in the year 2000, when we first began drilling the Barnett Shale, I've been following all this money coming in from other countries to try to stall it. Right? I mean, first it was Russia. Putin saw that, and the Russian government saw the shale natural gas as a threat ultimately to their hegemony in Europe, and it's turned out that way. Right now, we're the big supplier in Europe. Then came Saudi Arabia. Once we started drilling oil shale wells, Saudi Arabia started pouring a bunch of money into these left-wing NGOs. And of course, now it's China, because they see it as a way to destroy U.S. energy security and national security. And so it's not surprising. I mean, it's just been this progression, all this money coming from all these foreign sources, and these left-wing groups, more than willing to just do the bidding of Putin and Xi and Saudi Arabia. So it's just wild.
Well, and we saw a lot of similar things in Europe, right? When Europe was killing their nuclear plants, when Europe was killing all of their oil and natural gas for net zero, you can follow that money and find that Russia and China were also big promoters of net zero for Europe. And now Europe has completely handicapped their own energy resources. So they're having to buy liquid natural gas from Vladimir Putin. So like they come here and say, why isn't America doing more to help Ukraine? Well, they're spending more money on Russian oil and gas than they are spending on aid to Ukraine in 2024. That is a verified fact. So again, wherever you land on the issue of Ukraine, the fact that the EU's net zero policies are killing their own energy and forcing them to buy other places, and they've chosen to go to Russia for that, I think is just such a damning indictment of the entire net zero climate movement.
So, okay, now we've talked 12 minutes about energy, and I'm going to transition now to this insane rumor. I want to talk politics. This insane rumor over the weekend about President Trump being dead. And you did a commentary on that. What was it, yesterday? I think you did, or was it today? I'm getting things mixed up. But yeah, I mean, talk about that issue, how insane it is. And what does it say about the Democratic Party, the state of that party today, that, you know, so many of their people, that's their voter base, you know, stirring up a rumor for literally zero evidence.
Well, I also just think, again, what a contrast. President Trump disappears from camera for 3 days on one of the busiest holiday weekends of the year, Labor Day weekend, immediately after a 3-hour cabinet meeting where he was going around the room like a cruise director. And then, 3 days, he's like clearly on vacation, and they're panicking and saying like, look at these pictures of him. He looks unhealthy, things like that. When none of this scrutiny ever happened during Joe Biden disappearing for weeks at a time, looking like a dead fish on a beach for about half of his presidency. And then when you hear people like Jen Psaki, who on her show did an entire monologue about how President Trump looks unwell, this seems serious, what could be going on there? Is he worried about polling? You kind of want to like knock on the TV and say like, is this real? Is this a joke? Because she also at the same time is the person who said, I never saw the person that I saw on that debate stage with Joe Biden when she was his press secretary for years, when we saw him shaking hands with the air, walking off into the wall, doing all sorts of things. And so just the lack of self-awareness there is so shocking. But the most damning overall, I think, is the Tim Walz clip of him saying, basically, we're hoping to get some news sometime suggesting that he actually did die. Like, what a crass thing. But it's just a reminder. You remember Tim Walz's most famous moment as the vice presidential candidate was when he said, I'm a knucklehead. Sometimes I say dumb things, and he continues to prove it. And he continues to pop up everywhere. And you've got to imagine there's some Democrat somewhere who wants to shove him in a closet and say, Tim, you are not helping us with anything. But it really is, to your point, crass that like Democrats are so quick to jump on an insane conspiracy theory based on almost nothing. We call it Blue Anon. They call all the Trump supporters with, conspiracy theories QAnon. They're the Blue Anon, and they are ready to jump at anything.
So another big topic this week, of course, is Congress is coming back, right? And I heard somebody the other day say, well, they're only working 3 days this week. And I looked at it and I thought, no, they're only really working 2 days this week, because they convened on Tuesday at noon, right? And then they're working all day Wednesday, and they probably already adjourned today to go home for the weekend, right? So that's really just 2 days kind of compressed into 3. They were just off for 5 weeks. Shouldn't Congress be working like Trump does, 7 days a week, about 12 hours a day? We got a budget crisis coming up, a fiscal cliff coming up, and they're just flying back this afternoon to go home.
I'm going to be your unique voice on this, because I do agree it is beneficial for people to see Congress working longer weeks, spending more time in Washington. But I do think that there's a misconception that the time they spend in Washington is the only time that they're working, in part because the 2 senators that I worked for, they filled those home work periods up to the brim. Orrin Hatch, I could not get to ever take a day off, even if he was home, because they pack in those constituent meetings. And one of the most important things our Republicans need to be doing right now is selling their victories to their constituents, because it's hard to get the political will for every spending fight when people are still not sure how they feel about things like Trump's big, beautiful bill, which we can all agree had something for everyone. But polling shows us people still have a lot of questions about it. And so for me, I want my members balancing that time. They need to be here voting. They need to be confirming President Trump's cabinet, but they also need to be home pounding the pavement, having meetings, having, local media where they're going on to say, this is what we've done. This is what we're going to do. You need to be engaged because the Democrats are trying to destroy our country, because we've got tough midterms ahead. But to your point, we had a long period where the Senate worked extra long weeks to try and get as many of President Trump's nominees through. Democrats have thrown up every obstacle they can. Republicans are talking about ways to navigate around that, whether it's changing the rules so that you can confirm even a few nominees at the same time to try and get past that gridlock. I think that, this conversation is warranted. We have never seen a gridlock for gridlock's sake posture like we're seeing right now from Democrats, where they will slow down a nominee for a day and still vote for him because they just want to slow things down. And normally that's, been something that they just don't do, or they don't do to the degree we're seeing right now. And so I do think it's good for us to see them in Washington, particularly after such a long August work period. But I also just want people to remember, just because they're not in Washington doesn't mean they're not doing other important work to advance President Trump's agenda.
So I want to say one thing, and you're right about that, of course, and I shouldn't be so flippant about it. But
no, it's not flippant. I think you're completely right. People need to see more of it, but hopefully they're also using that other home time well.
You mentioned Orrin Hatch, who is one of the truly great American senators we've ever had in the U.S. Senate. I had the pleasure of working with him on a couple of things years ago. Heck, you may have been working for him at the time, and I probably met you back then,
Love to hear
briefly. That. But just a great man, great human being. And I appreciate you bringing up his name because I miss him. And,
I appreciate you saying that. And I'm sure that his family does too.
Yeah. You did an appearance with Dana Perino to talk about the president's right track, wrong track numbers here this week. And I want to give you a chance to talk about that. Where are we on the right track, wrong track numbers?
There's still a lot of sort of elation that we're no longer in those Biden years. The right track, wrong track numbers under Biden, we would regularly see 70, 75, in some cases, almost 80% of the country saying we are on the wrong track. With President Trump, it's gone back much more to a normal space. It's not as positive as I think anybody would like it to be, but that's, what you would expect with conflict around the world, with, market challenges that we're seeing, with President Trump's effort to reset global trade in a way that's causing just a little bit of uncertainty. But it is still significantly better than it was, polling wise for President Biden. I think one thing that is interesting, though, is we have polling that shows us that literally some polls, 0% of Democrats think the country is on the right track, which just shows how partisan, that can get, how partisan the opposition to President Trump can become. But I would say still President Trump is in a much better position than Joe Biden was. His own approval ratings right now are 4 points higher or so, according to the Real Clear Politics average, than President Obama was at this time. And to me, as somebody who watches sort of the political horse race election cycles, this is a very different climate than what President Trump and Republicans faced in 2017 and 2018, the midterms in his first term. It's still not exactly where we'd like it to be. We need to do a better job of selling our victories, of making a case to the American people, because the American culture is just anti-incumbent. It's very rare that people have 2 years of, one party with the White House, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and say, let's keep everybody where they are. They like shift. They are, kind of impatient, but they're better. Republicans right now are better positioned according to right track, wrong track polling, and according to President Trump's approval and even the generic ballot than we were at this point in President Trump's first term.
Well, listen, we're getting close to time here. I don't want to keep you over time because I know you're really busy. Before we close up, though, I want to give you a chance. Tell everyone where they can find you on YouTube, on X, anywhere else you want to direct them to find you and what you do.
That is so kind of you. We are at 10minutedrill.com. You can find links to all of our different platforms, but we are on YouTube, 10 Minute Drill, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you look up 10 Minute Drill, you'll find us. It's a logo of the Capitol. It says 10-minute drill on. Also, Facebook, Instagram, X. One thing that we've tried to do is obviously we have a full long form podcast, which again, long form for us is 10 to 12 minutes, but we break up those segments into individual clips that you can find for a small bite-sized piece of what we're doing with YouTube Shorts, with Instagram Reels. We try and sort of package this up the best we can. So again, 10-minute drill on any platform that you might use. You'll find us, and we do spend a lot of time on energy because it's something that just really fascinates and animates me, but also a little bit of everything. We try and get news of the day. So if you're turning on the TV, we've already talked about something you're going to see, things like that. So David, thanks so much for giving me a chance to plug that.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on, man. And like I said, I'm not just blowing smoke. This is something everybody needs to be looking at every day. It's such a great way to set your day and to know what's really going on, what's really important. And then you can go about your day and do some more research if you want to, but at least you got that 10-minute dose of the hot issues in the morning that really set your day. So thank you so much.
That is very kind. Thank you.
Wish you the best of luck. And I would love to do this again with you sometime.
Absolutely. There's always going to be more updates. So thank you so much, David. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching. This is David Blackman signing off for now. We'll be back with you next week. Another episode of Energy Impacts.